Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My final session of the day. Hopefully you've all been enjoying the sessions thus far this week. I'm really pleased yet again to have, well, I'm going to call them friends now because they are friends, albeit virtual ones, because we've become friends over the last seven or 8 months since we've been in lockdown. The wonderful people at Citizens Online. And today I'm joined by Brian, who's the Digital Brighton Hove Partnership and Project Manager, and James, who, if you've been on previous events, you will be aware of James, who's the Research Manager at Citizens Online. And I think we're going to get an insight into the sort of digital support that you've provided to the good people at Brighton Hove City Council over the period of the pandemic. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Well, I hand over to you. I'll let you start, and I'll just mute myself.
Thanks very much, Nick, and hi everyone. We obviously can't necessarily see all of you. If you can turn your videos on, that's great. We can see a few of your faces. If you'd like to, it'd be nice if you wanted to introduce yourself in the chat. And obviously, please do put any questions in there. We'll have about half the session, I think, for questions and answers and a bit of discussion. And we'd like to hear your experiences too. So do drop some things in the chat as we go. Citizens Online is a charity that's been going for 20 years. We help organisations to ensure people doesn't exclude people. We work both in terms of direct delivery, but also more kind of consultancy or research and evaluation role with organisations. Just to give you a rough idea of today's session, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Digital Brighton and Hove is. Myself and Brian will both speak a little bit about how Digital Brighton and Hove has been providing support during COVID-19, looking at provision of remote digital skills, some of the work we've done around devices and data, and some of the network support we've done with other organisations. Then we'll have, as I said, about half the session for Q&A and a bit of a wrap up at the end with some further resources. So what is Digital Brighton and Hove? It's something that's been going since 2015 as part of the One Digital Collaborative Programme. That's a big national scale digital inclusion programme, which Citizens Online is one of the lead partners for, along with Age UK, Clarion Futures, Digital Unite and SCVO. And that spirit of partnership is taken through to Digital Brighton Hove. It's cross-sector. The organisation does have a lead partner in Brighton Hove City Council, but we also work with a range of other organisations that are in the private sector and the third sector as well. In Brighton and Hove, as in many local council areas, there's a focus on digital inclusion in libraries, and Sally, head of libraries, was our main contact in Digital Brighton and Hove, but in community settings as well. So they were looking to extend the provision of digital support throughout third sector organisations that were providing it as well. We also were working at the council at a time that they had a digital first programme, essentially a transformation programme, restructuring the delivery of various services, and that seemed to suit really well. Our team was actually based in the same office space in a room in the Central Library in Brighton. So transformation projects, so we could have some conversations with our team about inclusion issues that might come up. I'm going to hand over to Brian to introduce himself and talk a little bit about the work that's been happening recently.
How do everyone? Hey. So as I said, I'm Brian. I'm new here. This is month 1 today. So happy birthday to me, or month day, whatever it is. It's been a great time being here, and I'm been really fortunate to be in this position because I had the opportunity of working with Citizens Online in my previous role at Clarion Futures, and we worked on the One Digital Programme, which was a 3-year lottery-funded project that was looking at a conglomerative means of analysing different types of digital championing. And so it was great to work with Citizens Online, and so that knowledge is literally being transferred into this role, and they can continue as is. But leading from on what David just said with the work that we did with Digital Brighton and Hove, as we all know now, we are living in the COVID world, and it's looking at how can we deal with that and how can we circumnavigate those difficulties. So we looked at the opportunities we had working with the council, and we worked with their vulnerable people cell and different community partners who work with people, dare I say, on the front lines, because at the time we weren't doing direct delivery. And so what we did was we're working in the COVID-19 phase now to ensure that people can have access and also get their skills that they needed in this time. And we were just talking before you all came online with Nick about there's no argument now. There's no one anywhere that can make an argument as to the relevance or necessity of being digitally adept in this new COVID world. So some stats and facts for you all. These are some of the numbers that we've worked with. We've worked with more than 40, but this is where we are now. We've had 40 digital champions whom we recruit, train, and support. 194 remote one-to-one sessions, and this was just March to June this year. So this is actually within the pandemic. This is not talking about anything outside, or actually even since. This is just that 3-month snapshot. We've got a new line set up, which is specific for the work that we're doing. It's not widely promoted, but you can find it if there is an absolute need for this help. And you can see that there. We've had 13 digital inclusion webinars delivered. So that's essentially, that could be training, that could be a network meeting, and those are the things that I'll be picking up and continuing on as of the 19th of October. So those happen frequently, and they're well attended and supported by the community members. You can see the page views on the website, which you know, by any stretch is good numbers. And whilst between March and June we gave out 34, we're now well surpassing those figures because we're continuing with the tablet loan scheme and helping people get access to facilities which they were never able to do so. Okay, so picking up from the last stat, there were the tablets distributed to individual organizations. And I think what we had was the devices.now and working with GTF, Good Things Foundation, etc. We didn't get to choose the devices. If there was anything, you know, that we took a knock on, was that the quality and applicability of the tools at hand weren't that good, but you know, we were working with the tools that we had, as it were. So I think as introductory devices, particularly for people who couldn't get access, it was a great doorstep to begin their ventures online. But you know, they were really quite successful. We had 24 tablets loaned out by ourselves to support vulnerable people, and we had another 10 of those tablets provided by devices.now distributed to residents. So, and in fact, our digital champion today has just come back from delivering another 3. So it's work that work, I'm happy to say, that continues on, and we're hoping to gain additional funding to do that. So this is an interesting project that we did with a organization called Jangler. They created this device called a Getbox, which essentially allows you to get Wi-Fi and distribute it around your premises without need for broadband, heavy wiring, and that really intravenous work. Basically, this box obtains a Wi-Fi signal in the air and converts it into Wi-Fi that people can tap into as you would when you make your phone into a hotspot. It's been met with really good success, and we've used it in residential homes, and we're at the point of essentially the project was prototyped with us, so we've had some good feedback. There isn't anyone saying that it's great, but no one's saying it's not working, which is fantastic. So, you know, the direct feedback that we've had is that it's working okay, and people can get access at, you know, fraction of the cost. And that's something that we're working with an organization called Jangler to continue. And we're working with Just Life and Diversity and Ability. So these are people who are vulnerable adults and or with potentially with disablement or neurodiverse issues that they're dealing with. So this is a fantastic opportunity for them to get access for like 0 to no money, virtually. Another fantastic project we did was working with Tech Take Back. And again, this was another project that we were able to prototype and work with them. And as you can see, we know that it's one of the most horrendous impacts on the environment, the amount of plastic and landfill that goes into disused equipment. But fortunately, there's a lot of companies now that you can return your failing bits and bobs to. And the great thing about this project is that we were able to get these equipment reconditioned and distribute them again to vulnerable adults and people in need. And so they can have a device, those who have never had them or who couldn't afford them, who had them before. And the great thing about this project, as with the previous one, is that it was met with really good success. And we're going to be talking again on Monday about how we can enter into a partnership where we can help support Take Back to reach the community organisations and residents in Brighton and Hove and East and Sussex overall, so they can get access to equipment. So we've worked with a number of community organisations. We worked with Tech for Good Brighton, and they were a great intercessor for some other organisations that we supported. As I mentioned before, we worked with 40 local tech volunteers. So we work with Digital Unite in order to get people trained up to become digital champions, and they may be called anything from tech buddies to digital enablers or whatever. But the core thing is that we are the nexus that we enable people to get connected to these services. And if you've had any kind of experience searching for digital services online, digital is not a word you want to put into the internet, basically, because you're not sure what you're going to get back. You put in for digital training, you're going to get some IT professional wanting to teach you how to use Excel. And obviously, we're talking about usability, accessibility, and giving people the confidence to do and utilize. So it's great that we're in this position and we have such reach to help all of these organisations and support their residents directly.
Yeah, once again, we should emphasise that these are the numbers of people that were helped during that lockdown period, those 3 months. But we had helped a lot more organisations in the 9 months prior, when the focus of the Digital Brighton and Hove project had been specifically on the organisational level. So we'd identified 133 local organisations in the third sector or private sector that we'd worked with, and about 244 local staff and volunteers who'd been involved in the project in some way from them. And the key bit of this work was not just that we help people who are digitally excluded themselves, but enable some of those organisations that are helping people to deliver services that they had been delivering face-to-face and move over to a digital model. we regularly find that the people who are digitally excluded or who have low digital skills are not just this sort of external client user base of people, residents in an area, but actually the staff members of organisations themselves. And that's certainly true in lots of community organisations that are not familiar with some of the remote tools that we've been using lately, whether that's video conferencing or some of the project management tools like Slack and Trello, those sorts of things. That's been quite an interesting strand of work.
Yeah, we've managed to get 22 organisations matched with a tech volunteer to help move their services or their delivery online. So that's been a brilliant success.
And one thing that's worth saying here, which is not very helpful to anyone who's setting up a project now, potentially, but that, you know, what really helped us during that period is that we had a large number of organisations that we built up relationships, mutual trust over years. So it was easier perhaps for Digital Brighton and Hove to respond quickly to the pandemic than for other places. It's perhaps worth saying a bit more about how the organisation works. Is this, as I said, the kind of lead client is the City Council and ourselves, but we have a steering group that includes the Department of Work and Pensions and representatives from the NHS, as well as third sector organisations that are working with people in disability or homelessness, and you can see citizen advice on there. But the broader network of organisations, we've had contact with about 300 organisations in Brighton and Hove over the last few years. We're really pleased that, unlike some of our other project areas, there's a lot of private sector organisations that have engaged with us in that period, which has been really valuable. We've been able to keep kind of engaging those people through email and webinars and video calls during the pandemic. Brian mentioned the webinars earlier on. We've been setting up new network meetings for them. In some ways, the key thing at the start of that period was to get people talking to each other, because a lot of people were doing things, but it was difficult to match up what they were doing. And that's kind of a key role that the network's been able to play. Obviously, a key challenge has been that normally digital champion work is a very face-to-face activity. Someone will be sat down next to someone, certainly within 2 meters, helping them to do something. And that's not been possible, partly because of social distancing and partly because of the ways that venues have responded. Some of the key venues that people might have been using, such as libraries, have not been open. Cafes, other places where these type of sessions would normally take place. So we've moved to providing a lot of our support over the phone. We have done, some digital champions have done sessions through video calls or conferencing services. We've run sessions where we've talked to people about the options for screen sharing or remote access tools, but there's key difficulties there. You know, with people who are very unfamiliar with the internet, the idea that someone's going to be controlling their device from a distance is potentially a bit of a turn-off to any work. So we've really emphasised the need to build a sense of trust with the people that have been supported through phone contact before moving on to those more complex systems. We've obviously been signposting to lots of guides that are available from partners of ours like Digital Unite and others, but we've also been sharing the core skills for a digital champion and really emphasising that there are a lot of people who've been on furlough or wanting to volunteer at the moment, that their level of digital abilities are good enough to help people. They don't need to be an IT whiz. What we're really looking for is people who have soft skills of support, who are able to listen, who are not going to give people jargon that they don't understand, who can follow the needs of someone who wants to get online. And obviously at the moment there are particular hooks that people have, particular things that are motivating them to get online, whether that's around accessing health information or financial support. But we traditionally look at things that are people's interests, people that are a bit more fun, something that can make being online seem like an attractive proposition, not just something that someone has to do. So yes, we've been reminding people that the key skill really is patience, and that checking in regularly, encouraging people. We really think that it's not, digital inclusion is never something that can be solved by a single organisation nor at a single touch point. We're talking about long-term engagement with people. So checking in and encouraging them on a journey is really important. And we've talked a bit about how people can publicise their ability to help, but the key thing that we think has, perhaps in some places there's been a bit of an opportunity missed, is that a lot of calling of shielding of vulnerable people was happening by councils and by some other organisations, social prescribers, that sort of thing. And there's a great opportunity there to ask some questions around people's digital skills or their access to devices and connectivity, and to do some form of triage around that in terms of identifying people who might need some support. And I don't think that's always been happening, so we published a blog about encouraging people to do that, and I think there will be stories of that happening more and more that we can celebrate. Just to mention, over here on the right, this is Anna, our new digital champion in Brighton and Hove, who's been having some good experiences there. You can read a bit more about her on our website. So before we go to questions, I just thought I'd mention some of the challenges that we've been facing. Some of these are about things that have been particularly important now, some of them are longer lasting. So as ever, we've had a bit of a problem with accessing sustainable and responsive funding. It's been always an issue for digital inclusion, and often it's been because there's been a belief that everyone's online now. And as Brian said earlier, that has been chipped away at a lot with the pandemic. A lot of people have come to understand that there are these serious issues around people accessing digital services, but there still can be a bit of that there, and obviously organisations are in particular financial situations at the moment. A further problem is that we've often found, and I think this is the session that some of you may have attended earlier today, we've often found some poorly designed or inaccessible digital services that might be specifically around people who are disabled, who have specific needs in terms of the design of websites. But it also just can be everyone. You know, that those services are not always as usable or friendly to people who are not familiar with the internet as they could be. As I'm sure many of you have come across, in recent years, there's been quite a focus on skills in the digital inclusion, where we've talked about people who, you know, are internet users but need a bit of help with doing more advanced things or doing things that they're not used to doing. The pandemic has really shown us about the need that is out there in terms of data poverty. The need to access connectivity has grown substantially when people no longer have access to the libraries or cafes or places that were providing them with free connectivity previously. Suddenly they're reliant on mobile phone data or something like that, which speaks a little to the project with Jangala that we were piloting. I think we're still learning the best approaches to that, you know, in terms of how we work with Sims. So it'd be interesting to hear from others about how they've been approaching that issue. Because obviously you can get devices out to people, but we're thinking about what are the long-term consequences. How long can we support people with that data? What interesting solutions can we come up with to get around that problem? We've also had lots of people identify questions or ask us about issues around privacy and security, particularly as we start to move to this remote form of digital support. So internally in Citizens Online, we've developed a new safeguarding policy for our digital champions that's responsive to the current situation that we face, trying to think about the particular issues that are raised when someone's helping someone over a video call or over a phone call. And lastly, Brian sort of mentioned this earlier, he was talking about those devices that we have received. We did have some issues with the way that those are often coming with a lot of strings. There's a lot of reporting requirements around them. And again, we're exploring ways that we can address those device issues through different systems, perhaps investing ourselves in getting devices or looking for other ways of getting hold of them. The devices.now scheme that was operational previously has become, and the link was on that slide, has kind of merged into this reboot project, which is there's a really good frame for a website there, which is collecting details of places that are providing kit and projects that are getting it out to people, but it's still being worked up. There's a great map and you can explore your local area and see what's going on, but it's not been fully populated yet. I'll just hand over to Brighton to talk about some of the experiences that we've been having with learners. Oh, you muted, Brian.
Yeah, that would help, thanks. Thanks, James. So as you can see here, a couple of quotes from real life people who have worked with us and have received the tablet loans directly from Anna, as you've just seen in the picture. You know, the digital champion has been wonderful, and having the tablet has been absolutely invaluable. It has changed my life. You know, these words, I'm sure we've all done testimonies and we all do work that is impactful. I think one of the things that we want to do in capturing these things moving forward is to see if we can catch some of this visually, and that's by audio, visual, and recording it. Because there's nothing more heartwarming than when you see Mavis smile and she's telling you this rather than me here reading out what she may have said or paraphrased. But I think, this work, the more digital we get, the irony is that the more human connection you need. And everyone says digital, and essentially digital is about interfacing. But the more digital you get, the more human you have to be. And I think that's a core part of this work. So digital champions will always be key. Networking, as we're doing now, will be inevitable. We always have to do this. And making sure that we get people, help people, and signpost them, refer them onwards so that they can make their missions come to life, essentially, and help these people. It's even the second quote. It's so exciting. I can look at all my hobbies and passions. It's not like being stuck with whatever's on television. I get to choose what I want to look up and to watch. And therein lies the beauty of being online. So these are our contact details. Essentially, you can reach out to the Digital Brighton and Hove project directly via the top email. So if you want something about our work or want to get on our mailing list, drop us a line using that and we'll send you all of our stuff. And I'm sure anyone could join our network now because it's virtual. You don't have to come down to the Sussex coast. There are my details there, and James. Please be sure to make note and just reach out to us if you have any questions. You've been a great audience. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, could we perhaps get a look at everyone? I'll stop the slides now, and I see there's a few comments and stuff in the chat. If we could see people's faces, that would be good. I'll just try and drop the slides as a PDF into the. Oh, this is not going to look very nice. I will do that. I'm going to keep looking at you all for a second. I'll drop the slides, a PDF version of the slides, into the chat at some point, so you don't have to worry about any notes. But are there any questions for us, Nick, that you've identified?
I did send you one actually, and that was from, hold on, Mandy. Any advice on who is best placed to manage a device loan scheme, councils or third sector, considering security, etc.?
That's a good question. Do you want to say a bit more first, Brian?
Yeah, I think the cool thing about that is it's if you have, so there's three elements. There's who's providing the equipment, who's receiving the equipment, and who's being the go-between. Because generally what you find is whoever's providing them and not giving them to the people who need them. So it's find out, how do you find out who needs them? First of all. Secondly is if the council providing them, there's a whole lot of work that goes into why are they providing them, and do they have the right equipment, as we've seen. It's one thing to be altruistic and say we've got equipment, but is it fit for purpose? But I think the core thing is it's not whether or not it's the council, it's whether or not they have the correct people. And by that, I don't mean if they have the right temperament, I mean the right organization. So do they have, are they working with digital champions or people that work with the client group in the first place? If they do, then that service can easily just dovetail into that provision. But if it's something that, say for example, a think tank within the council have identified, and then they go, oh, let's go around to a residential home and do that, that's not going to work. The best way for the council to do it is to engage with perhaps someone that's doing it, unless they're doing it themselves. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd echo what Brian's saying. Really, there'll be cases where councils perhaps are still managing their council housing stock. so they have relationships with residents in that sense. But otherwise, I think in terms of the groups that the client groups that we're usually helping in these situations, they're often people who have a more trusted or a closer relationship with a third sector organisation that's supporting them. And it's really, although it is often about the device, people really need a device, it's a lot about the wraparound support that people are going to get to set that device up or to troubleshoot it once something goes wrong. As I've mentioned, there's this question of who's going to continue to be paying for data. So in those type of situations, I think often we would probably recommend that it's a third sector organisation that's doing that last part of the delivery and can be doing that wraparound support. But that's not to say there's no role for the council. And as I said, the council is sometimes doing those big mail shots to every resident in an area. We've had that locally. Yellow letters came round. They are a good opportunity to let people know that offer exists. The council is somewhere that a lot of people in the area will look into to see if there's some kind of provision of this nature. But I think that networked approach that we have does tend to work well, because someone who's homeless, someone who has English as an additional language, in those settings, it's great if they've got an established relationship, someone who will support them with that device.
Okay, we've got a couple more here. Again, quickly from Mandy, I'm looking to explore leveraging corporate responsibility rather than social value to get free Wi-Fi devices and training. Any models for doing this I can learn from?
I mean, the devices.now system, as far as I understand it, was quite based on this. So the devices largely came from the large corporates who were involved in that scheme. And if you have a look through that reboot scheme, you'll see there are private sector partners involved in that there. I think that's what I would say. Brian, you've got anything more to add on that?
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot of suck it and see with that, I'm afraid, because we're all in different parts of the country and there's no uniform way to do that. And CSR in and of itself is now, it's almost, well, put it this way, before the pandemic, we had Brexit to contend with, right? And now we still have Brexit to contend with, and now we have an international pandemic. So if you think about CSR in its traditional sense, people's arms are getting shorter or their pockets are getting thinner, something is happening. So you have to think about CSR in different ways, as in sponsorship in kind or equipment in kind, rather than money, or some, maybe they want to give a professional service in kind for which has a monetary value. But I think that you need to think about it strategically in terms of what you can get. So it does exist. You just need to shape it.
The other aspect of this, which I've noticed, because you're not just talking about Wi-Fi and devices there, you've mentioned training. So I think in Brighton, I think this is right, Brian, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but we've traditionally often worked through the banks usually have some kind of digital champion or digital buddy scheme where some of their staff are trained up to be able to help customers with digital things. And I think in Brighton and Hove Lloyds, we found out that they basically stopped that scheme, principally because doing it face-to-face was no longer an option. But obviously, a lot of our digital champions have moved to doing it remotely, but that's not something that they've explored as far as I understand it. So hopefully that sort of thing that Barclays also have, the Digital Eagles, hopefully that stuff will be back up and running at some point. But I think a lot of those organisations are facing quite difficult circumstances in terms of people working remotely anyway. So actually there's, as Brian's saying, there's sort of less scope for some of that work than there has been in the past.
Yeah, 100%. That work is peripatetic, and they get out into the community and they engage directly. But COVID has put the kibosh on any kind of stuff like that. Yeah, I think that's the core thing. But what we do for training is online. And what we've managed to do is to teach a man to fish, essentially, is the model. So we work with organizations and probably upskill the management or the project coordinators, and then they can then cascade that learning down to their teams of volunteers and staff, and then do a lot of that stuff remotely. But yeah, I think Zoom and doing things like this is the core method right now for any kind of training.
Yeah, I see Andrea's asked a question a bit about this, about whether we change our approach for working with staff as well as the wider community, which, yeah, the really short version of that is just to expand a bit on what Brian was saying, which is that when we train staff, we tend to do group sessions, which can sometimes, or was sometimes happening with what we call end learners, people in the community. But we tend to focus on digital champion support for one-to-one when it's with someone who's digitally excluded. And a lot of that tends to begin at least with a group session for staff. And I mean, it can be really tailored. It depends on what we find. And we find quite varying things when you talk to staff groups. You can often find people who are confident in their skills in a lot of areas, but not with other aspects, or who are confident in their own skills, but are not confident in being able to help others with the tasks that they're likely to be trying to do. We tend to start off by surveying in these cases because we're looking for people who can be digital champions, but the survey questions are designed in such a way that we also identify people who need support themselves. And obviously, there's very little chance you can become a digital champion if you're already not confident in your levels of skills.
James, could you show slide 15?
Yes. 1 second.
Can I ask a quick question while you're finding that slide? This probably sounds ridiculous. But at what point do you stop trying to get somebody digitally included? At what point do you say, we've tried everything we can, this person doesn't want to? Do you know what I mean? I'm just thinking in our own town, in the Peak District, we've got all sorts of things that the church do, like tea and chat on Zoom, where the average age of the attendees of that is probably late 60s, early 70s, which is brilliant. But there are a number of socially isolated elderly people who are, and I know this because I walk the dogs all the time, so I see them, and I've seen them about our local town. And I would imagine actually they're potentially the people that have been shielding as well. I mean, obviously there's a difficulty, we talk about Zoom, and Pauline that's on the call, there herself, and a chap called Swain from the Orkney Islands, and a gentleman who unfortunately passed away very recently, John Popham, who was very much at the fore of sort of digital inclusion and sort of social inclusion, have a show called Dr. Tech on YouTube. But I guess those are all channels that are not necessarily for the digitally native, but you have to have connectivity, a device, and the ability to use that device. And it's almost like, unfortunately, I mean, you almost need not digital champion, you almost need family members to be digital champions. But again, in some cases, these people are socially isolated because they don't have family.
Yeah.
Or the family lives far away, or there is some issue between them and the family. Do you know what I mean? But unfortunately, for whatever reason, they are socially isolated. But yet they live, there are people living around them. So
to take two things from what you're saying, Nick. So first off, there are, or at least there were prior to COVID, certainly a very large chunk of the remaining people who were fully offline basically said in all the research that's out there that there's nothing that could persuade them to go online. Now, my understanding of what we have seen during COVID is that it's brought a new set of motivations for people to shift that. It's something that we're hoping we can research a bit more to find out whether that really is true. Putting some research bits together at the moment around that, but it's certainly the case that there are people who are reluctant to go online, and in that instance, it really is about looking at what, like I said earlier, that it's not just about the things that are forcing them on, accessing their GP surgery or something like that. It's trying to make it positive. A lot of feedback during this time period about WhatsApp as a really basic tool that has been helpful for people with families, partly because it runs on Wi-Fi, so you can not be draining the data with it. So in places in Scotland where we've had projects working with, we've heard from projects working with homeless people, that's been their preferred tool. Or if it's older people that are keeping in touch with family that want, have found it an intuitive app to deal with. So I think it's about shifting our perspective of what we're expecting people to do necessarily. You know, a lot of our work in Citizens Online is around getting people to be able to engage with council services, for example, transactional services. But as ever, the first steps of that digital journey might be on something quite a lot more basic or less transactional, more about the enjoyment, more about those things that Brian picked out in the quotes, people accessing entertainment that they can't necessarily through the TV or those sorts of things.
Yeah, 100%. It's literally, well, it comes down to two things. How much time you have to engage them, that's the first thing. But, or the A before the 1 and the 2. So that's how much time you have or how much reserves. And the one thing you have is if you have a center or a place that they attend. And it is, remember, being online is, as we're doing now, is about being social. So the more social you can make it, then that will help. And what I just spoke to Impact Initiatives, and they run a center in Brighton, and they now have more people attending their online Zoom sessions and becoming champions and running their own sessions for elderly and vulnerable people than they had before COVID. So it's the thing about it, as James just says, is counterintuitive. Working with Volunteering Matters down here in Brighton, and we're looking at devising a project that working around entertainment, so entertaining vulnerable and elderly people online. So it's conceptual. The whole thing about internet and digital and these buzzwords, they're a turn off for people.
Yeah.
So it's about finding the language that gets them engaged, because we're social people. So, you know, you see them, they're out. They're not stuck at home, which is its own thing, but they're out. So that means they want a connection in some way, shape or form. And then it's finding the hook and the right language to capitalize on that, to get them involved and to get them, hey, you know, you can do this on the tablet device thing. I don't say internet, I don't say online.
Right.
But yeah.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Brian, you wanted slide 15. I can't see the numbers here. So
oh yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
This one.
Yeah. So again, following up on what we were asked about training and the methodology, these are the things that we do and how we do it. So it's a number of tools. We've just mentioned WhatsApp and how easily accessible they are. But I think sometimes we lose sight of, because we can't see the woods for the trees, right? Because we're just surrounded in it and by it. But they each have their own pros and cons, but they're all available for free. That's the key underlying aspect of all of these. And I think the reason why Zoom has picked up and blown up as much as it is, because even with the FaceTime or Skype or WhatsApp, you need an email address or you need a mobile phone and whatnot. Essentially with Zoom, you just need to click the link. You don't need the app. You don't need anything else. You don't need to register. You can just join this meeting if someone sends you the link. So, you know, you need to understand what your audience needs are, and then how to facilitate them with which tool is appropriate. But we deliver loads of our training online, and as a result of that, we've had to devise or update our security and safeguarding policies online.
Yeah, I was just gonna right before we finish, I'll highlight some of the other stuff. You know, one of the things that comes up a lot is about that initial connection, the data bundles and stuff, and you'll get this bit of the slide as well with the link to the stuff that the ISPs have been doing around data caps and zero rating certain sites. So that can be quite helpful to have a better understanding of where you can direct people to be going, that you know it's not going to be costing, it's not going to be contributing to their data allowance. I've got a question, Pauline, because Pauline, it's nice to say that you've said this thing about Facebook. Is that what you were going to talk about, or something else?
No, something else. This thing about getting online, because I'm meeting a lot of people in my communities and the work I'm doing, how to connect people who don't have broadband at home. How do you start the conversation with them? How do you guide them towards the best option for them?
You want to go, Brian? I mean, I think this is the stuff we put on here about these. Yeah. Brian was talking about the Jangler device. That's really works best in a place where there's multiple occupancy. So you're talking about.
I've seen that. Yeah, we talked about that in the Dr. Tech show.
Great.
Brilliant.
Otherwise, I think, trying to get people to think about the dongles is, a smaller version of that on my side. We have done quite a bit of that in the Scottish projects that we're doing up in the Highlands. I noticed someone was talking about mentioning the work that we did in Orkney. Some libraries are now reopening. Locally, I know the libraries that are near me have reopened, and they have included reopening for people who want to use their computers and their internet.
Yeah, but these are people, older people in the community who want to carry on with their social groups, and a local organisation is giving them a device. I'm helping them with that as well, but it's getting the connection, getting the connectivity, the data. One organisation, one business that I've spoken to has got a great deal for people who could get really cheap broadband, but people don't want to sign up for whatever reason. So what are the stages to diagnosing what's the best of these options to give to people?
That's a good question. I think it's, whenever we've done that sort of thing, we've done it case by case. We don't have we don't have like a script that we go through, unfortunately. But it's something worth considering because, as I said,
it'd be good to have a flow chart of some sort.
Yeah, we're facing more of that sort of inquiry. In the past, it's not something that used to come up to us, and we were aware of it as a problem instead because people had these other options that didn't usually come up.
And also for people to get the right device, because not all devices are enabled for data bundles. So people are buying stuff from Curry's and other high street branches or shops are available, and they might not be getting the right device, and then they get frustrated, and we want to try and head that off at the pass.
Yeah, it's very difficult at the moment again because you get a lot of these instances where family members will buy a device for something. This is reminds me of something I wanted to say, Nick. You do also know from the research that's done that a lot of the support that people do get is from family and friends. A lot of the digital championing that happens might not be called that, but it is from family and friends. The difficulty with that is that those family and friends usually don't have any training in it. So they're just passing on workarounds and solutions that they've come up with, which might not necessarily be the best advice to be given. And often that relationship is quite different to a digital champion. There's often, difficulties in the approaches someone's taken. They're not necessarily passing the knowledge on. They might be just telling them how to do something rather than them giving someone the skills to do it for themselves or to understand where they might get answers to their questions independently. It can often be a relationship where you constantly need that family member or friend to help you do a very simple task. Sorry, that was going away from your question, Pauline, back to what Nick had been saying. Are there any other questions? Someone here said something about the mutual aid groups. I know locally there is a mutual aid group that's been one of the more successful or established ones locally is developing a digital inclusion project. They're planning to leaflet everyone in the parish to find out what their needs might be and work on it. So I do recommend getting in touch with those mutual aid groups if you have them in your local area to see what they might be doing. I'm just looking through to see if there are any other questions.
Okay, so I've seen a question about promoting digital champion support to reach those who really need it. Again, I think, is that your perception of need or theirs? That's the first thing, and I don't mean that pejoratively, because we could see people and think they need something, but just like James just mentioned, workarounds, people find workarounds. They get their kids to do it, to get their grandkids to do it if they need something or whatnot. That's one thing. But I think the best way to reach people is again through whenever you have that human interaction. So if you remember the example I gave in my first question about whether or not it's the council or the third sector organisation, if you are engaging them, I think that's the first thing. Recognize that if you meet them on the regular, and then it's about having conversations that are not scary and sit downy and this is what you need to do. If it's for example, coffee morning, bring your device, you know, those kind of things. And once, you know, Mavis sees Jane doing it, she's going to be like, oh, maybe I'll bring my eye thingy that my granddaughter got me and we can do it together. You know, if you take technology and make it more about people in a world that we're social distancing in, let me not forget, it makes it easier to kind of skin that cat. I think that's the core thing is to use your network and your mission to make it about continuing your mission and making it easier for your mission to reach them through the use of this device. I think that's it.
Just as a general point, I was working recently with a housing association, and they were talking about tenants accessing their services online through whatever device, and they did a really interesting study of the age groups that were accessing their services online. And it was interesting because they broke the study down by from effectively 16 years old up to 90s, and they had a very interesting graph that they created of the ages of people accessing their services through their digital devices, and they called it the hockey stick because as you would expect, you know, the 16 to 25-year-olds were all obviously immediately on their devices and accessing the tenant services as an online feature. And then it was a pretty straight line all the way down to the 80s, you know, people around the 70s, 80s. And then you had the hockey stick where people then from the 80s into the 90s actually came up and you started to see these people accessing the tenant services online, and this of course created quite an interesting load of questions as to why is it 90-year-olds are suddenly finding, and of course then it was they called it the grandchild effect, where the grandchildren were then assisting and helping you know, those people of the late 80s and 90s accessing the services. But it was quite a study they did. It was involving quite a large community of people. The ones I think they were getting about 24% of all their tenants were using the online services, which was not a bad percentage. And out of those 24, they then did this analysis of the age groups who were actually engaging with the services. But it was the hockey stick that I think caught them out a little bit. That suddenly these 90-year-olds were using these devices.
I mean, it is always really worth saying that people are often very enthusiastic about it once they are doing it. So we hear great stories from 80 and 90-year-olds that we work with. You know, it's not an insurmountable challenge, even for people who initially have very little motivation about it.
Yeah.
I think we might be pretty much out of time, Nick.
Yes, we're just coming up to that time, and I think this is going to, yet again, excellent and great to meet Brian for the first time. Hopefully we'll see you again, Brian. I'm sure we will.
Yeah, I hope so.
I make sure citizens are online on every event I do, because you know we need to keep pushing digital inclusion. You know, it's obviously people like Stockport and others are doing a great job, but it needs to. The story and the benefits need to go wider, you know, and it's not just about benefits; it's about people's lives at the end of the day, isn't it? So, you know, there's nothing more important than that. So, I would like to thank you both. Wonderful as always. I will be making this recording accessible to all with the slides, and I've cut and pasted the chat, including that extra bit that Pauline's just put in the chat box. But yeah, if you're not joining us for the next session, have a good evening. I'm hopefully see you tomorrow. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Nick.
Take care.
Bye.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Bye now.
Bye, everyone.
And end.